there, it's Mike Madge. I'm back with SailJuice.com, and again, we got 3 times DN World Champion Matt Struble with us. Matt today is gladly joined us to discuss Downwind. We're going to be taking a look at taking your DN down the course, the techniques involved, the tactics involved, and getting you around the leeward mark in good position. So welcome again, Matt, and thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be back with you.
Yeah. So again, we're going to make use of a video here, and we got an excellent sailor here. I think Matt, you'd recognize this guy, I think.
Yeah, James T. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was 2020 North American champion. So this guy knows what he's doing, and the bonus part is Matt gets to take a look at you here, James, and critique some of the stuff you're doing, and look at some of the good stuff you're doing, and we'll take a look at it. So we're going to pick this video up as he's coming into the windward mark here. That's where we left off last week. So you'll see the windward mark coming into view here. So what I want to start with here, Matt, is just first of all putting yourself in that boat there as you're rounding the windward mark. Like I know a lot of sailors, especially if they come from displacement sailboats and they want to get into racing, their immediate thought after rounding that windward mark is, okay, let's let the sails out and let's put the bow down towards that leeward mark and let's just sail on down. But that's obviously not the case in DN sailing.
Right. Yeah, Mike, high performance sailing and ice boats, been doing this for a very long time, of course, but it's, the difference in boat speed can be dramatic. We're not talking about tenths of a knot. We're talking about, multiple whole numbers here. So it really begins before you get to the windward mark. So, we talked about it last time about upwind and, whether you're overstood or understood and these types of things, the ley lines. But, it really translates into the transition from upwind to downwind. Let's say you're slightly overstood and you can get some angle, typically, summer sailing, you would approach the windward mark, you'd be just laying it, right? Your bow would just be creeping around the windward mark. But in ice boats, you can work your way to windward a little bit so that you end up bearing away and really getting a much shallower angle to the downwind from upwind. So it's, the downwind really begins before you get to the windward mark in that setup and configuration. But then as you go around, of course, the boat accelerates dramatically. It's amazing, actually, the G forces you feel on your body and particularly your head wearing the helmet. As you bear away, it's a significant pull on your body to the side. But we don't let the main sheet out. The apparent wind stays forward, and obviously the rig stays bent out, and it's a much different scenario than summer displacement sailing.
So I guess a question I would have for you, Matt, is like you said, the downwind begins, as you're approaching the upwind mark. So is it now you talked a little bit last week about understanding, but I guess you got to be very careful with understanding if you're losing too much speed coming into that windward mark then.
That's right. Yeah, it's something, and this is really where, we talked a little bit last time as well about, your sighting laps. We were talking about, the rig can be a little bit stiffer upwind compared to downwind and getting that balance together. But also it gives you the opportunity when you do those couple of sighting laps to look at the ice, look at where the weather mark is set up. Is there a snowdrift right at the weather mark, for example, or some clear, smooth ice just to windward? It may affect how you approach that windward mark and, your strategic plan for transitioning to downwind.
So what sort of considerations go into where you're deciding to go? Like, are you just using your speed to head off to the right side of the course looking downwind, or what sort of tactics are involved as you come around that windward mark? How are you deciding which side of the course you want to go downwind?
Yeah, again, for me, it's 2 factors, really 3 factors, I would say, is one, the ice conditions that you scoped out during your sighting laps. As you're going upwind, your final approach on starboard tack into the weather mark, are you in a lift? Are you in a header? Ice boating, you're transitioning through the wind quite fast. So you need to be, taking into account what you're feeling on that last transition into the weather mark. And then finally, of course, where you're at in the fleet of boats and, what sort of room you have to work for. Obviously, you can't sail through the boat ahead of you. So you have to have a strategy. Either, you have a mode where you can sail hotter, a little higher, a little faster, and you have enough room in the race course to get by that person and then obviously jibe and clear them. Or is your best scenario, perhaps there's a little bit of a righty coming into the weather mark, and if you jibe, you're going to catch that same breeze into a header for the next downwind leg.
So I guess the question I would have, say, let's play that scenario out. You're coming into that weather mark on a righty, so you're getting lifted up into the weather mark. So do you want to do an immediate jibe? Like we watched a video of going around the course with Karl Jablonski there, where he was doing that quite effectively to pass boats. Or do you want to carry some of your momentum rounding the weather mark first before you work into that jibe?
Yeah, I think it depends on the breeze and the ice conditions and the speed of the ice. But in normal conditions, like we're seeing here on the screen, it's pretty, obviously clear ice, pretty fast ice. Is a little bit texture, a little bit bumpy, but you can, there's very little risk to continuing, give yourself 60, 80, 100 meters of space to accelerate, because remember, as you're bearing away through that transition from upwind to downwind, you're accelerating quite rapidly, another 10, 15 knots quite easily. And so you want to allow the boat speed to come to you, if you will, before you make any drastic maneuvers. But I can use an example. Last year at the Western Regional Championships, I had started on the left side of the course going upwind. The first upwind beat, a pretty good sized right shift had came in, and I went around the weather mark, deep mid pack near the back of the fleet. And I recognized, obviously there was a pretty significant right shift. The whole fleet was sailing kind of the standard diamond shaped race course, if you will. They were at starboard tack downwind and jibing in. Well, I recognized I wasn't going to be able to sail through, let's say 20 or 25 boats to get to the front of the pack. I had good speed. So I jibed immediately at the weather mark, hooked into that right shift, which now was heading me almost down to the leeward mark. And I sailed all the way from deep 25th or so into second place by the leeward mark. And that was just a simple tactic of reading what the conditions were doing. So you really have to be in tune with what the wind is, the ice is, and then where you are in the fleet.
So I guess that leads me into the next question. I mean, if your attack or defend position. So let's start with being ahead, which you're pretty accustomed to being ahead. What sort of defense strategy do you have for defending against the fleet rounding behind that weather mark?
Yeah, if you're the lead boat, that means there's a couple of things going through my mind. One is, as I round the weather mark on starboard tack, I'm naturally in clean air. If I jibe immediately, particularly if it's light air, there's an entire, there's another 49 boats on the starboard lane line coming to that weather mark, and they're just chewing up the air like crazy. So I'm real hesitant if I'm the lead boat to do a maneuver, a jibe very early in the downwind leg. I would tend to be a little bit reserved, sail out on the starboard tack and make sure that I'm not jibing into air that's already chewed up by the starboard tack upwind boats.
Now, if you put yourself in a position like a lot of the sailors are, you want to advance through the fleet here. What's some of the attack strategy you have if you're the boat behind or you need to pass some boats? Well, what sort of strategy do you have for that?
Yeah, and this really plays into the setup of the boat. We spoke last time about the upwind, downwind configuration, really from the characteristics of the mast bend and plank bend and things. And so if I have my boat set up right, I have options. So I can, if there's let's say I round the weather mark in 5th, 6th place, and there's a line of boats in front of me, good breeze, clear ice, and I can sail a little bit high, maybe hike a little bit, bend the rig a little bit more because the rig is set up properly, it's compliant, and I can lean on it. And if I know I have good pace, I'm confident in my boat, I can, generally roll over boats, because one of the things that you notice here is it's very difficult to see behind you. If there's a boat right on your hip, it's almost impossible to see that. You almost hear them before you see them, unless you do a real extreme, head turn or something of that nature. So I'm not afraid to lean into it, sail a little bit high, go for speed, because you can raise your boat speed downwind by 7-8 knots of boat speed by 2-3 degrees of angle. So it depends. If it's a nice big championship course, mile and a quarter leg, and there's some room to really stretch your legs out, I don't mind going for speed. I find that to be a better alternative than jibing, unless there's a strategic reason to jibe, and that is a wind shift, ice conditions, things of that nature.
And I guess with ice boat and high performance boats in particular, the downwind is a bit of a mystery in terms of an angle, because as you're well aware, there's a large angle that you could sail at, and without instrumentations on board like they have on these America Cup boats to tell you what your target speed should be. How are you judging that? Are you erring more on the speed side, or?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because the wind is always coming from the bow, right? In an ice boat, when you're going 45, 50, 55 knots downwind, the breeze is always pointing forward. So it's really a feel, and it's a very subtle feel, and it's a dynamic feel, I would call it, in that we're not trying to fly the windward runner, a foot off the ice, but we want it to be light, and you can just feel that. The nice thing about an ice boat in this configuration, when you're laying down in the cockpit, your head is kind of right in the middle of the plank, and you get a really good sense of, righting moment, to how light the windward runner is, and then also how much the rig is bending. So it literally, you can feel the force vectors pushing down on the rig. So if it's really pressing, like maybe you're sailing a little bit high, the mast is really bent out, you can, head down a little bit, the mast will straighten up just a touch, and you can improve your VMG. So there's a lot of different angles available to the sailor in a DN ice boat, more so than upwind. Upwind is, you have generally, 2-3 modes upwind, but downwind, it's a big window of opportunity on the sailing. And it's really a seat of the pants type of feel. But you can look at it, you can translate that into some mechanical areas, like how much the mast is bent, the feel in the plank, these kinds of things.
Now, in terms of gear shifting on the boat, like a lot of people think, oh, let's just sheet in block to block and let's just go. But I mean, with hitting snow drifts, light patches of wind, what sort of gear shifting are you doing on your boat?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because looking at the configuration and the boat sailing upwind to downwind, it generally looks the same. But reality, downwind, a good downwind setting as just a starting point is roughly the main sheet eased about 4 inches compared to upwind. So that is, upwind, you may be block to block. And part of that is we use that mechanically to de-rotate the mast, and we pull some camber out of the sail, and of course get rid of a little bit of induced drag in the mast itself. Well, downwind, the apparent wind still is pretty far forward, but not quite as much as it is upwind. So just a slight ease, about 4 inches in the main sheet, allows the mast to get just a little bit more mast rotation, a little bit more camber forward in the sail, and allows you another gear to go a little bit lower downwind.
And what about in terms of your body position? We looked last week upwind, nice and low in the cockpit, head down, stretched out a bit. Is there any difference in your body position downwind?
Yeah, good question. And in an ideal state, if I'm the lead boat, I can go wherever I want to go. My feet are forward in the cockpit. I'm down again. I'm going for minimum windage, and just trying to sail the boat, lighten up, get rid of a little bit of windward riding moment, and then just feel the boat. I'm tucked into the cockpit. I can steer nice. I'm comfortable. I can see good. Now, if I have a few boats ahead of me and I'm trying to, like we talked earlier, trying to press over the top of them, I might be a little bit further in the cockpit aft to get a little bit of increased riding moment and to be able to lean on the rig a little bit more.
Nice. Let's just watch this guy downwind. Maybe you can comment a bit on some of the things he's doing.
Yeah, this looks good. I mean, you can tell the ice a little bit bumpy, and what a nice perspective of an ice boat going downwind, but clearly going fast. Rig has been out nice, not too much, not too little, just a real nice configuration, nice setup. The other thing, notice how loose the leeward shroud gets. You know, as the rig bends, obviously the hounds get closer to the base or to the deck of the boat, and therefore the rigging, you know, effectively, you know, has to get shorter if it could, but it pretty interesting. So here we're getting ready for a jibe, and you can see, look at his right knee is bent. So that means he's sliding forward in the cockpit. So that's doing a couple of things for you, is getting some weight, additional weight on the windward runner, which is what we're steering with. Because think about it, the you know, this boat right now is going, you know, 40 knots or something downwind, and the camber of the sail now, as he turns down a little bit, that all turns into induced drag, right? So it lightens the weight on the front steering runner. So getting some weight forward is real important downwind, especially for a smooth, clean steering boat.
Now, how would you differ? Like, you know, you almost look at the tack and the jibe almost look like the same thing. Is it similar? Are you doing a slow turn at the beginning to initiate the jibe?
Yeah, that's also a little bit different than the upwind. In that downwind, because you're turning obviously with the wind, you have much more room, or it's less of a hit for aero drag, you know, through the eye of the wind, if you will. So downwind, clear ice like this, you can make a very gentle turn. It's you know, generically very similar to the upwind, what we called VMG tack last time, in that initially you can turn down very slow. Once you get to the eye of the wind, mainsail flops over, you can accelerate that a little bit, but not nearly as much as the upwind tack. The downwind jibe is much more of a semicircle type of jibe.
And I notice, and I've watched this earlier, like it's probably pretty important to get your head over onto that new windward side as early as you can.
Yeah, as soon as it goes through the eye of the wind, you want to get your, you know, shoulder under, let the boom transition over, get your head underneath the boom, and then, you know, start to transition your weight aft again now that you don't need so much pressure on the front runner.
And how much sheet ease are we talking here in the middle of the jibe to allow that all to happen?
Yeah, the gauge here is really what it takes to get your body underneath the boom, and that, you know, typically is about 6 inches of main sheet ease. So as little as possible, I would say.
Okay. And when you're coming out now, are you looking at heating it up again to get your speed up, or depend on the ice and the wind?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it's not immediate. And notice how straight the mast is right here. So it's oftentimes in this point of the jibe, and, you know, you're starting to accelerate the other side, as I just remind myself mentally, is, you know, you got to allow the boat to come to you a little bit. So it's not immediate where you just stomp your foot on the gas. The sheet, again, is, you know, we rolled through the jibe about 6 inches of main sheet eased, and now we're headed up. The boat's starting to accelerate, and as that occurs, you want to be really smooth, no dramatic steering or inputs into the rig at this point, because the boat is unloaded effectively. Remember, we've been talking a lot about the mast bent out and the downforce it applies to the runners, which is safety and security as well as riding moment. So right now in this, you see a lot when it's really windy, clear black ice. You know, people go through a jibe and instantly spin out, whether they're set up way too stiff, of course, could have dull runners, or they're just trying to lean on the accelerator too fast, too hard. So out of the jibe, a little bit of increased angle on the new tack, and then you're going to ease the sheet trim back in. Rig's going to start to bend out, and now you can really lean on it. But it's ice boating, high performance sailing is, you know, it's one of those mode of sailing where you've got to really know when to have finesse and be careful, and then when to be aggressive and really push on it. And notice here, mast starting to bend out, starting to get comfortable. You can clearly see the speed is coming back up to full pace.
So now you got your leeward mark in sight here. What sort of thoughts are going through your head here? The leeward mark is approaching here.
Yeah, one thing unique about ice boating, and it's similar to the windward mark, but the leeward mark, you have even more room because you don't have that added windage of the wind coming at you. You're going with the wind effectively. That in clear ice like this, you never or very seldomly do you want to overstand. Overstand the leeward mark can be quite consequential because you just end up with too much power, obviously. If you're a little bit understood, you have plenty of room. You can bear down almost like a mini jibe, and then you cut all that distance off. So there's nothing better in a race course than sailing shorter distance.
So
Yeah.
we see here, like he's pretty much dead downwind at this point.
Yep, and this is what I referred to as kind of like a mini jibe, if you will. The leeward mark rounding obviously is a big transition from downwind to upwind, and ice boat just cannot go around at full pace. The G forces, you will lose grip on the runner blades and skid sideways. So just tactically, this is a really good move. This is one of my favorite moves if you can call your ley line just right. Is a little bit of a mini jibe at the leeward mark. It's allowing the boat to actually slow down a little bit, but because you've sailed shorter distance, you've opened up a little bit of gap on your competition that is slightly overstood or sailing right on the ley line.
So there's exactly what you talked about. He's actually jibed over right there, really.
Yep, and think about it. You're at this point, he's on starboard tack, so he's got a strong tactical position as well. So if he was sailing by a couple of boats, he cut the corner effectively on that ley line. He's coming back into starboard. He's going to be the inside boat. This is a really strong tactical move. And notice he's really got his eyes out of the boat at this point. Since he got close and initiated that mini jibe, his eyes were always affixed on that orange leeward mark.
And that's a pretty significant sheet he's there. And he's sitting up. A couple reasons for that.
Yeah, that's right. It's much to like what we discussed in the jibe, is that you're really aggressively sliding your weight forward. And I get to a point where I slide far enough forward to where my feet don't fit in the cockpit anymore and actually have to put them outside the hull, on the windward side. So if you don't have control, you're not going to have a good mark rounding. And that's the reason why his sheet is eased so much as well. It's you see people who want to go around, and this is the finesse part of high performance sailing, is that you see some folks go around with this sheet trimmed in. They want to heat it up and really go after it, and you see one of two things: either they can't steer because there's no pressure on the front runner, or the side runners are skidding around, and of course that's always slow.
So I guess the sign, we'll find out here in a second, but the sign of a good leeward mark rounding, as with any boat, is you want to be, that outside in, you want to be rounding fairly tight to that leeward pin, I would imagine.
Yes, enter wide, exit tight. Yeah, and this is something that I practice a lot of because it's not a natural move. I would say it's not something just going out and sailing around and practicing that you necessarily do intentionally. So even if we are out scrub racing or practicing, we're doing 1 lap races, for example, I'll always do a leeward mark rounding just to finish that leg, because this is something that it took a long time for me to learn and understand, but really analyzing it and looking at video like this is really fantastic. But you can see he's pretty wide coming in here. He's even got some windward body heel going on there. But the key points, I think, are weight forward and the main sheet eased, whatever it takes. So what I mean by that is, it's quite dependent, obviously, on the wind strength and the ice conditions. If it's, let's say, bumpy ice with a little bit of snow on it, you have a lot of lateral stability. You can really be a little bit more aggressive. But in this kind of scenario, or hard black ice, it's just too much to hold on to the ice, and the boat wants to go sideways. And of course, that does all kinds of bad things for you. One thing is that it damages your runners, takes the edge off. You're losing control, and of course you're unpredictable at that point, setting yourself up for the upwind beat. So coming into this is really important. And easing the sheet, sometimes it doesn't feel good or sound good that you're easing the sheet. Mainsail is perhaps even flogging to a certain degree, but I do whatever it takes to keep those runner blades from skidding around that leeward mark.
And I guess it's a little unfortunate we don't have sound with this, because I imagine you can actually hear a good mark rounding as well.
That's right. Yeah, you can be a mile away and hear a bad one. I can tell you that for sure.
Now, one question I have, Matt, and he's pretty smooth, so you're the expert here, so you can rate that turn.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's fantastic. I really liked the approach with the mini jibe. Bringing down the boat speed a little bit. Set up, entering wide, sheet eased, and then entering tight. And noticed he just had a nice smooth transition back to his sailing position to add righting moment, be able to hike, because now we're not worrying about steering. Now we're reapplying pressure to the rig. So right now the mast is pretty straight, and notice the main sheet blocks. Look at how much room there is from the boom to the deck. You can see the main sheet purchase at the back of the boat there, and we'll see that close up, I'm sure, as he starts to accelerate, the rig start to bend, and no spray from that leeward runner.
Wow, that looked excellent.
Looks
well,
good.
That was excellent, Matt. Thank you very much again. I mean, I learned a lot just listening to you here, and I hope everybody that's watching or get a chance to watch this also learn some things, and we appreciate you coming on again. Look forward to talking to you again.
Sounds good, Mike. Anytime. Really appreciate it.